What if India was still a British colony? It's a question that stirs up a lot of emotions, considering India's long history of struggle for independence. But what if things had played out differently? What if India had never gained its independence in 1947 and was still under British rule today? What would the world look like? How would India itself have changed, and what would it mean for the global balance of power? Let's take a moment to imagine a world where India is still a British colony and explore the consequences of this hypothetical scenario. First, let's think about the immediate impact on India's society. India is a land of immense cultural diversity, with more than 2,000 distinct languages and a rich tapestry of traditions. Under British colonial rule, the British government maintained control over many aspects of Indian life, from the economy to the education system. In this alternate history, it's likely that India would still be heavily influenced by Western ideals and institutions. British-style governance would still be the norm. This would mean that India would continue to follow a system of parliamentary democracy that's heavily shaped by British legal and political structures. However, many aspects of Indian culture, identity, and traditions might have been further suppressed in favor of British culture. The widespread use of the English language would be even more pervasive than it is today, and the country's major cities might look like miniatures of London, with British-style architecture and institutions dominating urban life. On a more economic level, India's role as a British colony would mean it would continue to serve as a key resource for the British Empire. India was once the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, providing raw materials like cotton, tea, and spices, as well as valuable agricultural products. The economic structure of India would likely still revolve around the extraction of natural resources to benefit Britain, with large portions of the country's wealth being siphoned off for the benefit of the British Crown. The development of infrastructure in India would continue, but mostly in ways that served British interests. Railways, ports, and roads would still be built, but perhaps not for the benefit of the common Indian person, but rather to facilitate the export of goods to Britain. India's own industrial growth might have been stunted, with British companies having monopolistic control over the country's key industries. Politically, India's lack of independence would mean that it would remain subject to decisions made in the British Parliament. The British government would still be the ultimate authority, and any political movements or efforts for reform would likely face heavy repression. The Indian independence movement, which once united millions of people under leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, would either never have gained traction, or it would have been crushed much earlier. India's population would be caught between a desire for self-rule and the political control of an imperial power thousands of miles away. This could create a society torn between the old colonial order and a growing demand for independence, leading to constant social unrest and possibly even violent rebellions against British rule. The British military presence in India would likely be stronger, as the British would need to maintain control over a population that might resist colonial domination. Now, let's zoom out and think about the global impact of India still being a British colony. The world after World War II saw the decline of many European empires, and many countries that were once colonies gained their independence. But if India had remained under British rule, it would have had a significant effect on the post-war global order. The British Empire would likely still be a major player in international politics. The decolonization movements that spread across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East in the 20th century might have been delayed or completely altered. Other colonial powers, such as France and Belgium, might have been emboldened by Britain's continued dominance in India, leading to slower independence movements worldwide. The Cold War dynamics between the United States and the Soviet Union would also have been affected, as India, one of the world's most populous and strategically important countries, might have leaned more toward the British sphere of influence, rather than emerging as a non-aligned power in the 1950s and 1960s. In terms of India's influence on the world stage, the country would still be a giant, but it would be an entirely different kind of giant. With British control, India would likely not have developed its own independent foreign policy, and its global voice would have been suppressed. India's potential as a leader in the global south, particularly in terms of economic growth and geopolitical influence, would have been stunted. The rise of India as a technological powerhouse, particularly in IT and innovation, might have been delayed or not happened at all, as the country's development would still be focused on serving the British economy. India's modern-day identity as a democratic, diverse, and emerging global power would not have come to fruition. One major consequence would be the continued divisions within India. The issue of religious and cultural diversity, which is often a source of tension in India today, would likely have been exacerbated by British rule. The British employed a strategy of divide and rule, which played on existing divisions within Indian society, particularly between Hindus and Muslims, to maintain control. If India had remained a British colony, these divisions might have deepened further, leading to more significant social unrest and possibly even violent conflict between different groups. The legacy of British rule in India still lingers today in the form of cultural influences, language, and legal systems, but if India were still a colony, these tensions might have been much more pronounced, making the idea of national unity even harder to achieve. Let's also think about the future of India's people. The standard of living in India might be far lower than it is today. While some parts of India would have likely seen development, mainly in areas that served British interests, many of the advances that the country has made since independence, particularly in fields like education, healthcare, and technology, would likely be non-existent. The caste system, which the British both exacerbated and institutionalized, might still be entrenched in Indian society, perpetuating inequality and social divisions. The progress that India has made in terms of economic growth, technological innovation, and global recognition would have been delayed, and many of the country's most famous achievements, whether in the arts, sciences, or politics, would likely never have happened. In a world where India was still a British colony, the global balance of power would have been dramatically different. The rise of India as a political, economic, and cultural powerhouse would have been stunted, and the shape of the modern world would be completely altered. But beyond the geopolitical consequences, this scenario would mean that the people of India, who have fought for independence and sovereignty for decades, would still be under the yoke of colonial rule, with their freedom, their culture, and their future shaped by a distant imperial power. So, what do you think?